Yes, hello once again, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, but more especially, welcome to Northern Ireland. Yes, hello once again, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see today we've made the journey across the Irish Sea to cover a two-day Charity Scramble event that's being held here at Craigantlet, which is not too far from Belfast. Now this track here belongs to the Jap master himself, Cecil Pearson, and this will be the 5th year of running this charity event here at this venue. Now in the last 4 years the Northern Ireland Classic Scramble Club have raised over £100,000 to help good causes in the area, so we hope to increase that monetary value when we finish with this 2023 event. Now of course the action all begins this Friday evening with the first block of racing, and then of course we will have the traditional barbecue soon after that with plenty beer and burgers to keep everybody happy. So it's quite a social event here on the Friday night, but on the Saturday of course we have a full day of racing to finish the weekend. So it's all happening here at Craigantlet here in Northern Ireland. But before we get down to any racing, let's get back to the paddock and just check out some of those very nice bikes that are soon to take part in this 2023 Charity Scramble event. Okay, so the first selection of bikes that we're going to take a look at are these nice Husqvarnas that were on display as part of Adrian Lapin's team of bikes that were going to be used over the course of the weekend. So first up we have a nice 250 CR 2 smoker with a good pair of Öhlins piggyback suspension units there on the back, but Adrian also had brought along this what I think is a 1983 250 CR, because I did have a 500 version of this bike myself way back in the day, and as I remember these were quite good little bikes for their time. Okay, not of course as powerful and as quick as its bigger 500cc brother, but still a very good club rider's bike for sure. Although I have to say that the bike that was grabbing all of the attention over the course of the 2 days was Adrian's big 510 4-stroke Husky. Now as you probably already guessed, this isn't a fully original Swedish Husqvarna bike, because this is a bit of a hybrid racer that's been made up from a modified 1986 Husky chassis with that big bruiser of a 510 4-banger engine in the frame. Now in this particular video we're only going to take a very short look at this bike, because when I get supplied with more details on the particulars of its construction from Adrian, then we'll do a full feature on this big Husky at a later date here on my channel. But certainly these quite awesome 510 Husky motors are not short in the horsepower department, and it's even quite common for owners to increase the cc's of these big 4-strokers to 570 and beyond. And if you're into your big single cylinder thumper motors, then you'll already know about the grunt and the power that these big single cylinder twin port motors push out. And even the fuel tank here on this Adrian Lapin bike isn't your stock Husky part, although it does look slightly similar to the fuel cells that you would have found on maybe the 1982 CR Huskies, but again I'm assuming that this alloy swing arm is the one that belongs to this 1986 frame. But as I said, as soon as I receive more information as to what this machine's all about with regards its sum of parts, we will do a full feature on this Husqvarna at a later date. And again, look out for this bike in action when it takes to the track, when it gets put through its paces by Adrian's son Chris, when he races it in the twin shock grade A class. But in terms of the bike's looks, it's certainly a lovely looking motorcycle, and quite unique as well, using that much later 1986 Husky frame. But this of course is just one of 4 Swedish Husqvarnas that Adrian brought along to race at this 2-day charity race event here at Craigantlet. Now, one of the other bikes that were causing quite a bit of a stir around the paddock was Cecil Pearson's latest acquisition to sit alongside his 9 Rickman Jap bikes was this extremely rare Rickman matchless scrambler, which is fitted with one of the big rare matchless G50 road racing motors. Now, this bike, it's said, was built by Adrian Moss, who of course took over the Rickman business from its original founders, Derek and Don, who started the company way back in the 1960s. And as far as I know, this is the only G50 engine to be fitted into a Scramble's frame, because these big 4-banger engines were built purely to take on those big Manx Norton road racers that were hugely successful during the 1960s. And since this bike was built, it's only been raced in anger just the once, which was way back in 2014, when the bike was ridden by British Scrambles legend, the great Andy Robertson, when he rode this bike at the Robbie Allen Memorial Scramble at Tinto Moto Park, where he basically was the class of the field on that day. But once again, and as in Adrian Lapin's big 4-stroke Husky that we just had a look at, this Rickman matchless is just far too good a bike to just browse over in this short video clip. So that's again why we're going to do a full in-depth feature on this very unique machine at a later date here on CDB TV. So make sure that you subscribe to my channel so as you don't miss it. But as I said, this bike will certainly be another nice addition to Cecil Pearson's collection of Rickman Jap race bikes. So look out for a detailed and comprehensive report on this very rare Rickman racer when we delve into its background here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. But this next bike that I came across on my Paddock adventure was John O'Neill's 1978 400 Maico, which is quite a tidy specimen of one of these iconic German racers, but of course not a fully stock original bike from that 1970s era, because nowadays very few of these old Maicos are still in original condition. Now, these twin shock Maicos, or Maicos if you're watching this in the USA, because I know that you guys over there pronounce these bikes different from us backward Europeans, but as we're all still British based, and for the purposes of this video we'll still call them Maicos. And as I keep saying, if you can't find yourself a decent 1981 490 Mega 2, then these 1978 or even 1979 bikes still make a very good alternative, because these also have a very good, strong chassis and a sweet, powerful two-stroke Maico motor. But if you're into your vintage Maicos, then you'll already know that this 400 piston port engine was just a fantastic motor, because I certainly had the same self-same power plant in my old 1980 bike back in the day, and these 400s naturally are not as violent or powerful as your bigger 490 Mega 2s, but they certainly do give you a nice spread of usable power right from the bottom end up to the top of the rev range. And normally all of the sparks for the motor's ignition were usually supplied by a Motoplat electronic system, which was tucked up very neatly behind this plastic Maico cover. But another quite nice bit of protection for the bike's exhaust expansion chamber was fitting this alloy guard onto the front of the pipe, because these exhausts certainly did suffer a lot of abuse while they were being raced on the track. So hopefully by bolting on this guard here, it'll keep dings and dents on the pipe to a minimum. Of course, in 1978 and 1979, Maico were still using these alloy fuel tanks on their motocross bikes, but as you're aware, they then opted to change to plastic fuel tanks on their 1980 models. But these plastic handguards are, of course, not an original 1978 Maico part, but nevertheless a very worthwhile addition to the bike, especially if you're riding it on a very bumpy and stony racetrack. But John did tell me that he's just recently given the bike a bit of a freshen up or a refurbishment, and it certainly shows, because everything's looking tip-top and ready to go. So John's old 1978 400 is another one of the machines to look out for when he lines up this bike to race in the twin shock grade B class. Although for me, personally speaking, this is still without doubt one of the better looking Maico models of that great 1970s era. A bike, of course, that in my opinion had a great handling chassis and a pretty awesome two-stroke motor as well. So it's a big well done to John for making a very good job of what was, and it still is, an iconic Maico twin shock racer. But once again, this was another quite nice looking old timer that I came across on my travels around the Craigantlet Paddock. And once more, this is another bike that's been fitted with a Rickman frame, but only this time it's been fitted with a twin-cylinder Triumph 750 4-stroke engine as its chosen power supply. Now, I'm not entirely sure as to the bike's particular year of manufacture, but it will surely be a 1960s frame with possibly that Triumph 750 engine from about the same year. But I'm guessing that this won't be a feather light motorcycle that you can chuck around the racetrack, purely because that big 750 twin motor is certainly no lightweight, but in terms of its power output and horses, there'll be very few bikes that will get near this big grunter when it races on the day. But as you can see, a nice pair of custom made 2-into-1 header pipes there that lead onto a single exhaust here on the left hand side of the motor, so there will be some very nice music played by these twin pipes when that big 750 Triumph motor gets fired into life. Although quite an unusual shaped fuel tank on this 750 Triumph, it's not your usual stock Rickman fuel cell that you normally come across on these bikes, but then again, this is maybe a bigger type of fuel cell to accommodate the extra gas required to feed that big thirsty 750 twin Triumph motor. But again, this Triumph twin engine also has the twin carburetors as well, one for each cylinder of course, so I expect that she'll enjoy quite a good drink when this motor's worked hard on the racetrack, because it is a bit of an intimidating lump for a motocross solo power plant, and it certainly wouldn't look out of place sitting in one of those big sidecar outfit chassis as well. Now, I'm certainly not up to speed with all of my different Triumph models and specifications, but I still think that these Triumph 750s were designated the T40s as I remember, but certainly feel free to correct me here if that's not the case. But for sure, what a bike to ride as an old classic racer with that fantastic Rickman frame and Triumph twin power plant. But it certainly won't be the lightest bike to chuck around a racetrack, but it will certainly be quick and sound fantastic when that big Triumph twin motor clicks into top gear. But for sure, there was certainly plenty of variety when it came to looking at old classics at this year's Charity Scramble at Craigantlet, and that's one of the attractions of this 2-day event, because each year that we return, there's always something new and interesting to take a look at. Okay, so the next classic that we came up against was this original 1972 410 AJS Stormer, and although these old Stormers may look a bit antiquated nowadays, in the early 1970s these British made classics did have a featherlight tubular steel chassis and quite a good powerful 410 piston port two-stroke motor. But these AJS Stormers came in 250, 370 and of course our featured 410 power plant, which was the big boy of the three models. Now, as I remember, I think it was a 4-speed gearbox that was inside this Villiers motor, and the clutch was just your standard wet oil-cooled affair that had a primary chain to connect the clutch and the crankshaft together. Now, the Stormer's fuel tank in 1972 was, as you can see, coloured yellow and made, of course, from super lightweight fiberglass, which for its time was the material of choice for these type of fuel cells, mainly because it was relatively easy to produce once you manufactured the initial moulds, because then you could, of course, just churn out quickly as many tanks as you required. Now, to feed that big 410 Stormer motor with its gas, it was usually a Mark I Amel 34mm concentric carburetor that was used to supply the fuel, and I'm pretty sure that in the early 1970s these Stormer Villiers motors were still using the old school contact breakers as part of their ignition source. But certainly a trademark of these old British-made classics was the use of alloy for the front and rear mudguards, because plastic was still a few years away yet before it was going to be the material of choice on further motocross race bikes. Although I have to say that if you were ever thinking about getting into classic racing, or even looking for an old British off-road classic to restore, then these old AJS Stormers are certainly a very good starting point, because there's plenty of them going around, and parts are still relatively easy to come by. But the other plus point here is that they're nice and light to throw around the track, although they may not be quick enough if you want to be standing on the top step of the podium. But without doubt, you'll certainly have great fun trying that for sure. But there you have it, another very nice original classic, 1972 AJS Stormer 410. And from an old 1970s classic to a 1982 Evolution bike, and this is Ivor McCree's YZ490 Yamaha, which just actually lets you see how far we've progressed in terms of motocross design in that 10 years, from our old twin shock Stormer into these much more modern looking Evolution machines. And compared to our old AJS Stormer, these YZ490s were certainly rocket ships in comparison, because they had a relatively decent set of front suspension that you could tune a little to different track conditions, and they also had a single rear shock that was connected onto the swing arm by way of a set of linkages. But more importantly, for the early 1980s, these YZ Yamahas had a reed valve two-stroke motor that could just about pull your arms out of their sockets if you turned the gas on too quickly, just to try and get ahead of the racing pack. But as you know, these YZ490 engines did have a bit of a reputation for being a bit fiery and unpredictable, but taking a little bit of time to set up the motor with regards its carburation and ignition settings certainly made this unpredictable beast a much more user-friendly power plant. And once you'd actually tamed it and got it running in its sweet spot, there wouldn't be many bikes that would pass you on a fast flowing track. Now, many critics back in the day also commented that the YZ's front and rear suspension was maybe a bit on the soft side for one of these big open class motocrossers, although with a bit more experimenting with different spring rates and weights of oil, you could certainly improve things and make it handle slightly better. But Yamaha were still using these old school drum brakes on the front of their Evolution two-stroke racers in the early 1980s, and this particular brake was one of the twin leading shoe varieties. Now, the rear brake again was an old school drum, but it wouldn't be too far down the road when Yamaha would then see the light and start to fit much more modern high-tech hydraulic disc brakes to all of their future models. But as you can see, Ivor's YZ490 naturally is in the Yamaha's international yellow and black livery, which were the colours that were used for most of the machines that were exported to the USA and some other countries, where of course we here in Europe and in the UK in particular would have had the much simpler white plastics with the red graphics. Now Darren Dunlop had also brought along a very nice collection of dirt bike racers. Most, it has to be said, were Hondas, but there were a good collection of red rocket twin shockers and a few nice Evolution examples as well. But as you can see, quite a line-up, and it certainly kept all the spectators busy looking at all of the different models. But again, Darren had so many bikes that were all packed tightly together that it just wasn't that easy to get a closer look at the individual examples that he had on display. But as you can see, he certainly seems to have a thing about these Evolution and twin shock Hondas. Now these clips that you're looking at here were filmed on the Friday afternoon, and my intention was to get a few of Darren's Hondas pulled out from the lineup on the Saturday just to get a better look at them, although as they say, the best laid plans etc. sometimes go astray, and come the Saturday we never really had time to do a more comprehensive study on some of Darren's collection, but at least we still managed to get them a bit of airtime here on CDB TV. But who knows, I'm always on the lookout for nice bikes to feature here on my channel, so we may indeed keep in touch with Darren to make another appointment. But without doubt, Darren did have quite a good assortment of Evolution and twin shock Hondas, and included in his collection, he said he had a Graham Noyce red rocket replica, which would have been quite nice to have had a look at, but certainly it was a case of too many bikes and far too little time to digest exactly what he had. But as I said, hopefully we'll get another chance on another day to take a closer look at some of these excellent Honda racers belonging to Darren Dunlop. And without doubt, Darren certainly put in a lot of effort to bring the bikes along to Craigantlet, so it was a bit of a shame that we couldn't document them further. So that's a very brief look there at Darren Dunlop's Honda collection. Now these were a couple of quite nice looking Maico 490s that I came across at Craigantlet, and both of these twin shockers were just about to be raced in the twin shock grade A class by Stewart McClurg. Now of course both of Stewart's bikes aren't your stock original Maico machines from the 1980s, because both of them have some very nice trick parts bolted onto them, which again is another reason that makes a Maico such a good prospect if you want to get into classic or twin shock racing, because although original stock parts aren't so easy to locate nowadays, there are still plenty manufacturers now making replica or upgraded parts for these bikes, so it's relatively easy to just put your own personal stamp on your bike with brand new modern replacement parts, and of course personalised bespoke graphics as well. And so our blue themed 490 is still the old 1981 chassis and engine, but with a replacement alloy airbox instead of the stock 81 plastic item. Now other parts like the aluminium rear brake pedal and the wide steel foot pegs are once more upgraded from what was the steel originals. But the Maico's front suspension is still the stock 81 factory originals, although a pair of fork socks have been added just to try and keep dust and moisture from damaging those delicate fork seals. And again on the front, the original front drum brake alloy back plates have also been swapped for a replacement CNC machined alloy part, and this rear drum and hub still looks like it's the stock factory fitted Maico part from 1981. Although the things that you can do with these old Maicos nowadays is almost endless, because as I said, you can paint the frames in whatever colour takes your fancy, and then colour coordinate the rest of the bike to suit. Personalising, of course, the graphics to your own particular tastes along the way. But despite the black wheel rims, this is still a cracking looking machine. Now this is Stewart's other 490 Maico racer, and this time it's decked out in this black and yellow livery, which to be fair I think actually suits this bike, but Stewart never actually built this machine himself, as this he told me is a recent purchase from another Maico fanatic called Peter Maxwell from Scotland. Now, of course, this featured model here is one of the later Maico twin shockers, probably a 1982 or maybe even a 1983 bike, but there's certainly not much on this 490 that's from that early 1980s period, including this motor, which appears to have had all of the engine casings coated in some kind of black paint. But of course the later 490 power plant in this bike, without the troublesome primary chain to connect the clutch and crank together, but these later motors used gears to connect both of these parts together. But as I said, this is another example of exactly what you can achieve with these old Maico bikes if you want to detract yourself from the original factory red and yellow theme, and then customise your bike with all of the newer upgrade parts that are now available for these bikes, including these alloy ignition covers, that alloy rear brake pedal, and more importantly, a set of nice wide footrests as well. Although I'm still not exactly sure as to why anybody would want to chrome plate a motocross race bike's expansion chamber when it's going to get battered by stones and mud and other kind of debris on the track. But these chrome plated pipes were certainly a bit of a trademark for the Maico only company back in the day, who for me were the kings of bling when it came to putting shiny bits and pieces on these old German twin shockers. But for sure a quite nice pair of top quality Swedish Olin piggybacks here on Stewart's Black Beauty. So you can see that the previous owner of this bike's certainly not spared any expense when it came to sorting out the back end of the bike. Now the bike's front and rear hubs are still the stock original Maico parts that have had the ribs machined off them to give the hubs a slightly different look from stock, and again to add more bling to them, which was another look that Maico only used to good effect back in the day. But Stewart's two Maicos may not be to everybody's liking, because I do know that many twin shock purists out there would never consider their beloved 490s in anything but the original Maico red. But for me personally, I still think that this bike's a cracker purely because it's something completely different from the traditional red, and in fact I'm even prepared to bite my tongue here and accept the fact that the bike has black wheels, because in this case they actually complement the bike. Although as nice looking as both of these bikes are, they're certainly not just showpieces, and you should be able to catch a quick glimpse of Stewart putting these bikes through their paces on the track if you check out the racing footage that will follow shortly. Now, this was another machine that I came across during my Paddock walkabout, and this was the late Tom Rutherford's 250 CR Husqvarna, which I think was going to be ridden by this young man here, Lewis Paul, who I'm assuming is a member of Tom's family. Now, I didn't actually know Tom personally, but as far as I can make out, he was a club member for many years, and he liked nothing better than racing this 250 Husky with the Northern Ireland Classic Scrambles Club. And I'm sure that Tom will still be very happy that his old race bikes not being mothballed and tucked away in a dusty workshop or garage, and it's still being used on the racetrack. And of course, the other plus here is that his old race bike has kept his original race number as well. So again, it's good to see that these club members who have given many years of service and devotion to their organisation are not being forgotten after they've passed on. But it's still a very nice looking Husky, and hopefully we'll catch a glimpse of Tom's old race bike when we watch the racing highlights coming from this event. Okay, so just to finish off our Paddock walkabout at this year's Charity Scramble, we couldn't finish without mentioning the man that's behind this annual charity event each year, Cecil Pearson, and of course his collection of beautiful Rickman Jap racers. Now here you can see Cecil on the left of your picture, just getting the bikes all set up just prior to racing. Now I know that Cecil's collection's been well documented here already on Classic Dirt Bike TV, but each and every time that you come across these bikes, you just can't help yourself to take another gaze at their 1960s Rickman frames with those antique but very quick 1930s John Alfred press switch power plants sitting there in the chassis. And not only has Cecil got those Rickman Japs, he's also got 3 of these Harry Stitt framed bikes as well, of which only a handful of frames so far have been made by Harry. So again, that all adds up to the rarity and uniqueness of this fantastic collection. But as I've said in the past, not only are these bikes super rare and quite good to look at, they're absolutely mind-blowingly quick as well on the track, as you'll soon discover when the racing highlights are posted from this 2-day event. But certainly a vintage collection like no other, with these 600cc methanol burning long stroking Jap motors. But Cecil not only supplies these bikes for his team of Jap riders, he also owns the track and is heavily involved in putting this very worthwhile event on each year. And it's really because of Cecil's generous hospitality that I actually make the journey to cover this charity event on an annual basis, but make sure that you watch all of the racing videos if you want to know exactly how quick these Japs are when they take to the racetrack. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed taking a look at some of those nice bikes from around the paddock that of course are soon to take part in this two-day charity scramble event here at Craigantlet. Now don't forget, you can see all of those bikes and many more like it when they take to the track after I post all of the racing footage from this two-day event. So if you're not already a subscriber for CDB TV, then I do hope you will consider doing that very small thing, because that way you won't miss out on any future videos that I post. But for the time being, from all of us here at Craigantlet in Northern Ireland, it's goodbye for now.